Indeed.
And we are recording
Great.
from the asylum in Bombay Beach. It's been such an eclectic day. We've had Cody's girlfriend sings like choral music as a side gig. And so she was here recording requiems this morning.
Cool.
And then I went over to Mars College, which is this big encampment out a mile southeast of here. And there was a really high-end like math course being given inside this structure in the middle of the desert. It was so surreal.
With the strange palette structure geometries.
Yeah. And we've been doing live streams of music from the asylum as well. So I've been wanting to cross-promote a bit. If you are watching this on YouTube, you can see the live jams from here at 4 o'clock almost every day. And we also have... and if you're listening on Spotify, go to YouTube and find my channel. I think it's just Roos Bully. How are you?
I'm all right. How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah. Good.
Are you liking life in Bombay Beach?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's interestingly apart from cities. You know, Indio becomes like the big city now.
Mm-hmm.
That's the funny thing. And I know that to others, we are the big city. So it's fun to live at a different scale.
Yeah.
You know, it's small. There's a funny thing where I can, my like mental imaginings, and sometimes also I like once a year I'll remember a dream, and it's always though in a building or a place or a space or an environment that I know extremely well, that I lived in for years, that I have mapped out like the back of my hand. Like my brain seems to always go back to those buildings, places, and locales that I know exquisitely well. And I always find it kind of fun in like a new place, in a new environment, to like watch myself or pay attention to myself getting better at knowing where I am in a place. You know, just like having that internal like mental map of this town, and it's already like building in my head. You know, you have to take like literal steps to walk to understand how long a distance something is. But I'm like starting to get and understand and recognize like landmarks and places and houses and things like that. It's very trivial. It's literally a thing that happens to everyone in every new town. But I've always found it like a fascinating process.
But then when you know a place well, it appears in your dreams?
Like a decade later, and only if I have like expert level knowledge of it. Like only if I can close my eyes and imagine walking through it.
Have you thought about memory palaces?
Yeah, I never have done one. I've never intentionally tried to shape my thinking into anything. Like people, like it's the same to me. That's the same category as like meditation or, I don't know, maybe breath work or something. Like something where you're just you're stopping and pausing and intentionally trying to be better at at something that could just happen kind of randomly and dynamically in your brain. And I just never pause to do that. I just let the things happen.
Yeah,
they just happen.
I was listening to a lecture on Maurice Merleau-Ponty last night as I was falling asleep by Bert Dreyfus. And he was talking about how wrong it is, according to Merleau-Ponty, and Dreyfus seemed to agree, to look at meditation as a good example of the way we consciousness and our, state of mind works, because it's such an exceptional state. So we shouldn't be doing phenomenology by meditating. That's just a weird thing that if you shut out the world, whereas being in the world is more, we should be looking at real life cases, not this weird exceptional cases as defining what it is to be and to think and to be conscious.
Meditation feels kind of more like what like hurdles are to, like meditation is to thinking as hurdles are to like walking around and running, as in like you have these artificial constraints. And the Olympic hurdling, it's a very bizarre thing. It's like, okay, we want to test how quickly someone can get from point A to point B, let's say on land and in water. They run or they swim. And then it's like, well, that's not interesting enough to us. Let's put literal hurdles in the way, or let's make them swim backwards. Let's make them swim inefficiently using their arms kind of above their head so they look a little bit more like dolphins. It's just, this is arbitrary kind of like category rules to make things harder. And I feel like meditation constrains the free flow of thought in a lot of ways. Maybe I mean I say this
Have
as
you
a
done it?
complete amateur. I've only done it when people that I know that have said, you know what might help you, meditation. Um, then responded when I gave my list of 100 reasons why I didn't want to do it. They said, well, how about you just like, come on, like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I'll do it with you. And so I've kind of only done it in a group with other people. And it seems nice, but to me, that's fundamentally like still a social activity when I do it that way.
Interesting. I've been thinking about, we've talked a lot about fathers and father figures, but we haven't talked about mentors. And I think I've found mentors super important in my life, and like not to be shy about looking up to somebody from whom you can learn about how to approach this life. And so you made a passing reference to your, would it be appropriate to call Sapolsky your mentor at Stanford?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's even how people literally refer to that kind of relationship.
Of PhD advisor?
Yeah, they say advisor or mentor, things like that. Yeah, it's quite literally. I think the closest analog is like a blacksmith kind of apprenticeship,
Mm-hmm.
where like you're learning a trade, you're learning a craft, and that craft tends to be, rather than like how to hammer out a chisel, it's kind of how to think about. Well, I'm sure actually I don't mean to dismiss the wide range of learning that takes place in a blacksmith apprenticeship. It probably is also about how to think about the materials and how to think about heat and how to think about what heat does to materials. And so similarly, like, he trains his students, his PhD students, in just how to think about science and how to think about data and how to think about what a scientific result means. And so it's very much just a mentorship, and it feels very similar to like a blacksmith apprentice kind of thing, which I love. I mean, I kind of hate that we stop apprenticing at some point. I would love to just keep learning over and over and over.
Absolutely. And I think that we're blessed with this, the absent and distant fathers, with this, like looking for substitute fathers and maybe not being, I think a lot of people are, I don't know, they feel uncomfortable admitting that somebody can be a mentor to them. It takes a certain, posture of humility.
Yeah.
And I think it's so rewarding. I think that we should all pick, don't be shy about looking up to people. And of course, you don't want to lionize them or idealize them too much, but
yeah. And I think I've always kind of taken like every time I take a step forward, I change direction based on the kind of person I imagine I'm effectively wanting to be. And it's not like I can imagine someone who doesn't exist. I have to know and see the person that actually exists to see what they're capable of accomplishing, and then take steps toward that. And I remember at one point, a PhD is like 5-6 years or something. And at some point it like dawned on me that my committee was, I think, 4 balding older white men and a guy from Iran, all of whom like collectively would, chastise me for my work ethic or for doing, they were the ones who gave approval and disapproval. And I realized that I had created this kind of almost like Mount Olympus of mentors and old men who would finally, at some point in my life, I get like approval and disapproval from I don't know, almost like an emergent, like amidst all of them was some emergent quasi father figure that would tell me.
One of my favorite books I've ever read is Salvador Dali's Autobiography. He's almost like a better writer than he is painter. And if you haven't seen it, look up The Secret Life of Salvador Dali. It had a huge influence on me when I was 19 or 20, and I discovered it. And I remember this image that he evokes of going into a bar and seeing this ancient old man trying to grasp a martini glass and his hand shaking, wrinkled and blotched, and he can hardly get the drink to his mouth. And he thought, if only one day I will tremble like that and have that just ancient demeanor, and he like looked up to it. And I always had, I guess because I had an old father, like I just always admired the elderly. And I think obviously in this culture we lack that a little bit. I think we need to nurture that a bit more.
So do you allow your mentors to be like fluid? Like at what rate do you turn over the mentors that you look up to or seek? I think mine is about 4 years. Every 4 years, I like cut and run and find something new.
Yeah, maybe that's about right. Maybe a bit longer, but they all stay with me, and I carry around their lessons, and often they're very flawed old men. I remember Dean Tavoularis, who was the Academy Award production designer that I got the chance to work for when I was 20 on 2 movies, and he was this like had the temper that you could not get away with today. You'd get like probably canceled for abuse, but the type of old school Hollywood temper of like throwing things and yelling and smashing the phone on the table when he was, and I was able to kind of admire him without taking I think also learning how not to be from people is equally important, and just being able to observe and say, okay, that can take this quality hopefully and learn from it. But then I still 20 years later, I carry around those lessons.
Right. Yeah, there was a kind of a romantic era of domestic disputes, wasn't there? At some point where like you used to be able to like throw dishes against the wall and it was like funny. It was like Laurel and Hardy funny. And now you get your like Airbnb canceled forever.
Not just Airbnb, you get canceled by in life. And I guess it's for the best. I mean, it's like the whole cancel culture could be a whole discussion. Let's not go there.
So how was your day?
I told you it was full of requiems and.
You said what other people did though.
Oh, I've been playing this piano, which I have not been playing on the podcast, and I have to get over my shyness about it, and that's why I sit behind it, even though I don't play it much. But I got this.
Yeah, I'm surrounded by these pianos that don't work. It's impotence.
They work. You just have to know how to use them. But so my day is mainly I wake up in the morning about 6:30 and I play several hours of piano. That kind of grounds my existence in a really nice way. Playing music is we've talked about you don't have this in your life, but I feel bad because I find it the most rewarding activity besides doing this podcast. But so tell me about, you studied philosophy as an undergrad, right?
Yeah.
And then you went straight into neuroscience?
Philosophy, English, and cognitive science. So I had 3 degrees as an undergrad.
So at Berkeley?
At Berkeley. Yeah.
And you knew you wanted to go into
years. No, I thought I wanted to go into philosophy. That was the thing that I found myself just drawn toward. Like I started drinking coffee in order to read a book of philosophy, not in order to read a textbook on neuroscience. But in the discussions that I had, I was just kind of aggrieved by the fact that philosophy kind of seemed to reach a certain cliff at some point in the discussions where when you became interested, I only care about the brain. So there's other kinds of philosophy that I'm just ignoring when I say philosophy. But you reach a sort of empirical cliff where the investigation is actually a scientific question that has an answer that can be studied or at least, gotten towards. And I just wanted to do those things. I was like, okay, yes, we can talk about brains in a vat, but you can also take a mouse brain out of its skull, give it a flow of salt baths and keep it alive for a couple hours and actually study it. So you can actually do a brain in the vat experiment in the lab down the street. So it kind of, I'm very much someone who likes a question and then just finds whatever kind of implement or thought process is required to get there. So what I cared about was perturbations on free will. That's just the thing that interested me. I didn't know how or why, it just is, which is in and itself one of the problems. And so the people that seemed to be studying free will the best were in neuroscience labs. So I just kind of wrote to a bunch of neuroscience labs and one of them took me.
But so scientists in general are a bit dismissive of philosophy, right? I think they see it a bit as a masturbatory waste of time. And I think even Sapolsky so Sean Carroll, whose podcast I highly recommend, he's a physics professor, and he's not shy about seeing the fact that philosophy is essential to science, especially when you get to a level of fundamental physics where the questions and the answers are inevitably philosophical to some degree, right? But I think he had Sapolsky on the other day, and that's what kind of instigated this discussion about him. And Sapolsky even makes some dismissive comment about, I accidentally started philosophizing or listened to a philosopher. I don't remember what he said, but it was some dismissive comment about philosophy. And yet he's talking about free will or lack thereof. And it seems that's you can't ask the question scientifically if you don't ask the question philosophically. What do we even mean by free will, and how do you frame it in such a way that the question makes sense and that there can be a viable answer?
Yeah, so I think one thing that happens at the extreme upper echelons of success within a field is lack of exposure to a lot of other fields. So they're kind of polymaths and Renaissance types that dabble in little things. But when you have someone who's extraordinarily successful in a narrow branch of a thing, like Sapolsky's very, very good at the thing that he does, which is neuroscience and kind of like hormones and primatology and stuff. You literally don't have time to do other things. He is 12 hours a day doing his job extremely well.
Mm-hmm.
And, I remember at some point him emailing me because he knew I liked kind of like books and words and things, being like, I just found this guy, Jorge Borges. Have you ever heard of him? Like, I'm really liking this stuff. And it's, it's cute, right? Like he's being exposed in his mid-50s to Borges for the first time. But of course that would be appalling to me. Like that shaped me, who I was as a teenager and young undergrad, right? Like Borgesian thought, which is like philosophy, I think fundamentally philosophy. And so first of all, on that, the way that I heard his comment, the dismissive comment on philosophy, was actually his brand of humor. Because I know deeply what he means by that is, if you get into that world, you simply have too many things to talk about. And when you are mechanical and try to reduce things down to their essential causes, that's a kind of, that's a stance, that's a philosophical stance that you can take. But science does not advance by questioning what science is. When you are a true scientist, you're not really you're doing the scientific method and experimental design and everything extremely well. You're not going to go in and say, well, like, what could we possibly, what other alternatives could there be to the scientific method? It's just not practical when this is your job and profession. And, I think about it kind of like there are professional athletes who are probably, just by virtue of their athleticism and the effort they put into their bodies, like probably going to do okay if they just uprooted and tried another sport entirely,
mm-hmm.
right? But in general, they're not immediately good at the other sport. And if you think about intellectual disciplines as kinds of movements that you have to actually study and practice to get good at, but it's just for thought instead of for your body, people just they're not automatically good at other kinds of thinking. And I don't think he's necessarily dismissing it, more so just saying like he's not exposed to it. He's not exposed to philosophical traditions.
So you're different. First, you're different in many ways. You didn't
a lot of things okay.
No, but you didn't go into academia, and you went into science with a philosophy background.
Yeah.
How would you say? How did philosophy help inform and shape your scientific approach?
I think I kind of like the counterfactuals of, there's a question someone I know asks, which is like, if you could choose any year to be born, 500 years into the past or 500 years into the future, which year would you choose to be born? And it's kind of getting at that whole Midnight in Paris, Woody Allen's thing about the counterfactual, like everyone kind of romanticizes certain previous eras, but it's extremely hard to romanticize like future generations that haven't happened yet, right? but we do often romanticize the past. And I kind of often think about identity with a similar kind of counterfactual route, which is, what would I be if I were born in like 1850?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what would I have ended up being? Like, if I had my same kind of like socioeconomic and birth, like the destiny of my birth was kind of like as similar as you can make it given all the variables,
Mm-hmm.
but it was 1850 instead of 1983. What would I have ended up being? And I remember I had this poet friend who got a poetry fellowship for writing about the gold rush. And so he's like, hey, I just got $5,000. The whiskey and the gas is on me. Let's drive up Highway 49 in California and just stop at every gold mill along the way. And it was amazing. It was an amazing road trip. And I remember thinking at the time, when I saw these gold mines like carved into the sides of these mountains, that clearly it took years to build these things and cut the timber and, like dig the mine, and then you got to build a cart and you got to put the rails down, and then the cart has to bring it to your like 3-story tall timber mill, which is sifting for gold. And I just remember immediately thinking, I would never, ever, ever in a million years have had the energy to do that. I would never have been that. In 1850, I would not have done that. I probably would have been like one of those guys that tried to rob the train that carried the gold, and maybe probably got caught after like 20 years on the lam or something, because some, federal agent outsmarted me. But I knew like deep down that if I were born in 1850, I would not be the kind of person to go into the mountains and try to find gold and put years of effort of hard labor into this kind of like lottery ticket hoping to pan out. And I think academically and intellectually, if I stuck to academia in every generation going back 500 years and probably forward 500 years, I would have ended up as a philosopher. I think this is the only unique time where neuroscience, neuroscience already, I would not get into graduate school. Like I'm only like 6 years out or something.
Why?
And because it's all math and computer science now.
Interesting.
It's hardcore. You need to be good at machine. You don't need to be good at these things, but you need to understand chemistry and atomic physics and machine learning and math. And those are just, I'm kind of more of I like watching mice and imagining what they're thinking. This is why I got along with Sapolsky really well, because his deep passion is going to Africa, standing on the, edge of the savannah and watching a troop of baboons and thinking to himself, I wonder what they're thinking. Like, that's what I like doing. It's actually mostly sociological. It's fundamentally, I think, philosophical. And it's not the kind of neuroscience that is going to succeed into the future. So I think there's this very, very small window where the thing I was interested in, which was perturbations of free will, could be studied. And there was only one small little thing that was a really good model system to study it, which is this mind control parasite. And it just happened to be the case at the time that nobody had ever studied it kind of with a neuroscience point of view. So my whole thing was I came at the exact right time, the exact right place, to the exact right person. And I said, hey, look, I think there's this very interesting model organism that we should study. And he had already been interested in this, which is Toxoplasma gondii, which is this little mind control parasite that makes mice not afraid of cats. And to me, it was a philosophical question. To me, that was you have a mouse who's afraid of a cat. You get into the brain, muck around with something, and now it's not afraid of a cat. Like, how does that work? And what does that say about when a human likes or dislikes something, when we prefer or are afraid of something? And so it really was just this kind of confluence of circumstances that made me end up doing the neuroscience side instead of the philosophy side. It's also there's some practicality to it as well, just professional practicality, where there's more neuroscience there's more job stability.
It's really hard to be a philosopher and not be an academic.
Yeah,
I feel like I've chosen that path, and there's definitely no signposts.
The roving philosopher.
Yeah. But I like the idea that it's a bit pretentious maybe to call oneself a philosopher, but I remember when Timothy Leary was extradited from Afghanistan when he had been broken out of prison, and he when they booked him to bring him back to prison, he was in a really good mood because in his extradition papers that went under his job description, they wrote philosopher, and there was no greater compliment for him.
Yeah.
So I obviously we have a passion for philosophy. That's what we're doing in this. Both explicitly in this podcast, and I think in the life that we've chosen, is trying to figure out what the fuck is going on, right?
Well, and I think you have elements of this kind of setting up on the sidelines and watching things unfold as well. But you like the world that you've kind of helped create here in Bombay Beach and what you do in the desert as well. I can only imagine you like it because you like watching people interact.
Oh yeah.
And you're a bad scientist in the sense that you're biasing everybody by creating the conditions, but you've effectively made little mouse cages and people play. They pile on top of each other and climb the ladder, and that's what's that called, a rat park. You give rats toys and they play, and it it's not too far. It's a different kind of science, but it's what Sapolsky did was, he wanted to see the kind of natural wild phenomenon in primate behavior in the Kenyan savanna. But you just want to do it here because you care about a different kind of primate behavior. But effectively, if you wrote all this stuff up, you could make observational science out of it.
Yeah, an intersection of science, social science, philosophy,
social science.
And anthropology.
Well, so what he would do is he would take blow darts and blow dart baboons with anesthetic, and then take their blood really quick to just get circulating hormone levels at any given time. You could do that.
But so his takeaway from it all is that free will is pretty non-existent, right? Does he believe in degrees of choice, or? He called himself in the podcast a hardcore incompatibilist. People who think that there's some compatibility between the scientific kind of deterministic, a universe that's governed by laws, and that we also seem to have a pretty strong feeling, firsthand, impression that we can make choices. So there's something called in philosophy compatibilism, which says, okay, yes, those two can coexist. But he doesn't even think, and I think Sam Harris has this view too, that not even the illusion of free will is an illusion. Like if you really think about it hard enough, we don't even have the sense of choosing. Is that his? And he thinks that as we learn more and more about the brain and about the way things work, that choices go back. The choice you think you're making in the moment can even be rooted sometimes hundreds of millions of years ago, and sometimes in your parents, and sometimes in your lifetime, sometimes in external facts, sometimes in neurobiology and chemistry. And so as we learn more and more, the concept of free will kind of just gets more and more diminished, right?
Yeah. So I always have trouble. So Sapolsky has a platform. Like he is known. He gives interviews all the time. He gives talks all the time. He's famous. He's got like a speaker agent, that kind of thing. His books sell really well. There's this guy, Aubrey de Grey, who he's a Cambridge, I think molecular biologist or scientist of some sort, who says that he thinks the human, the first human who will live to be 1,000 years old has already been born.
Wow.
And he gives this TED Talk style, like literally TED Talk with their style version of, he thinks, we've achieved an escape velocity such that the regenerative medicine will be able to regenerate faster than you age at some point. And a child born today, already some little infant wandering around, is going to live to be 1,000. And I know the guy. So he hung out in Palo Alto a bunch, and I've had, beers with him, and he doesn't really think that. There's a sense in which you need to make the strong claim in order to be a public intellectual, to have people be able to define themselves against you, be able to define themselves relative to you, to be able to make gradations, and say, oh, well, person X thinks this. What do you think about that? Exactly the way that you're doing now. And so it's actually really successful branding, right?
Right.
So to say he's a hardcore incompatibilist, I don't know. And I never actually was able to fully ascertain whether or not that's what he truly believes, or whether or not that's kind of the public intellectual soundbite that gets the most weight.
To me, the trouble with the free will question is that both perspectives are incoherent. Like, the idea that we have no free will is impossible to live by. And John Searle says a great thing about, like, you know, even if you're given the choice, you want fries or salad, and you say it doesn't matter, it's all predetermined, that in itself is a choice. We can't escape the fact that we can't live without making a choice
Right.
all the time, right?
Right.
And then the view that everything is determined is, I mean, the idea that we have free will is also incoherent, because if you just believe that things have causes, eventually the causes have to extend before and past you and outside of you, right?
There's a whole class of like questions that have binary answers that are either yes, no, that I find just kind of terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are there aliens out there? Yes. Well, that's terrifying. Are there aliens out there? No. Well, that's also kind of terrifying.
Yeah.
That this is all we get. The same with free will. Like, there being not, that's kind of terrifying. Because that's completely different than what it feels like on the inside. And there being free will, yes, that completely flies in the face of everything we know about how things interact and molecules interact, and our math and physics and our understanding of how the universe works. Like, something is going to have to give. And so back to Sapolsky's point a bit, I do think, though, so to be a hardcore incompatibilist means, in the world of like particle interactions being determined, like if you know where bowling ball A is, and you know its velocity and position, and you know what it's about to hit, you can predict like if you know the state of the universe, you know where it's going to be at like 1 second later.
Yeah.
That's determinism. Or you can make some gradations of that, but that's basically what it is. And so to be a hardcore incompatibilist means, even within that, there's no chance that you can have free will arise anywhere in there.
And also should be noted that even if you can't predict it, and even if there are multiple outcomes possible, that still doesn't mean we have free will. You could have also an indeterministic universe that also lacks free will.
Rolls dice, for example. So, but I think my take on his stance is simply that he follows the data. Like, he's a very good scientist, one of the best in the world, one of the best in history probably, and he just follows the data. And there's two things you do when you do that. You follow the trend lines, and you look for evidence, disconfirming evidence. So what does the trend line say in terms of what we used to know about stuff and what we know about stuff now, specifically with the question of free will? I think his arguments are extremely compelling about the history of things that we thought were once personality diseases, almost universally turn out to eventually be diseases of some physical substrate where something was wrong. So it used to be the case that you had a cancerous personality, a personality disposition that made you more likely to get cancer. Mm-hmm. It used to be the case that doctors would refer to an ulceric personality or a tuberculin personality. Ulcers are bacteria. Tuberculosis, bacterial. But we didn't know that at the time. Doctors didn't know that. Nobody knew that. We didn't know that cancer was like P54 mutations accumulated over time. For a very long time. And so you in the absence of data knowing why something is being caused, you just kind of tend to blame the person. This happens over and over and over. And so having an ulcer and an ulceric personality was a mental disorder. Having a cancerous personality was kind of a mental disorder. And now it's not, because we know better. And so his point is that the entire framework of the legal system is based on a fraud, which is that someone is responsible necessarily for their behavior. And that if you, and this is where he gets it gets controversial, which is he thinks like, if you take someone that engages in some of the most heinous human activities, you might find, not necessarily based on science as of today, but our neuroscientific understanding of the brain as of 200 years from now. You have to imagine that. We might discover that, that person had a developmental circuit abnormality that made them have a predilection for underage youth, or a predilection towards violence, or a predilection towards racism, or something. Some mismatch in the way that they incorporate information over time led to X behavior that we find appalling. And I think so that's where his argument is just simply, we don't know what things are caused by physical deformities or physical abnormalities. And humans have a wild history of getting it wrong. We used to think seizures were possessions of the devil up until very, very recently. What do we, and I struggled with this as well so like kind of the even mental health as of today. So schizophrenia, for example, if you take schizophrenics, where are we? We're in the asylum, right? This is we're in a building full of photographs of people criminally insane, right? Why were they criminally insane? If you ask what schizophrenia is, right now, people often think it's a disorder of willpower, maybe personality disposition. If you have a friend or know someone who's depressed, you might think like, oh, well, I just wish they could like get over it. Like how come they don't just kind of pull themselves out of it? Don't they have the ability to do that? And, we don't know the possible physical substrate or the thing that went wrong. And it's quite possible that schizophrenia is not a disease. I mean, it's almost certainly the case that schizophrenia is not a disease of personality or disposition or strength of will. It's going to be some physical thing that maybe on a circuit or network dynamic that we don't yet understand that is off or or not even off, just different. And one of the reasons Sapolsky and I kind of bonded initially about this mind control parasite thing, this is the whole reason, this was my whole PhD, was because it's actually found in a high percentage of schizophrenics. So that the parasite ends up not just in mice, but also in people. And if you look at the list of things that are non-genetic risk factors for schizophrenia, having this parasite is number 4. It's like the 4th highest thing that possibly means the strong interpretation would be that there are some cases of schizophrenia out there that were pushed over the edge or are caused directly by the fact that people have a parasite in their brain mucking things up and causing this. In which case, the thing that to me would be like a success, like if I was still doing laboratory science and working on this field, I would consider the gold star success, the like 10 out of 10 on my Olympic gymnast routine, would be if by the end of my life, people started seeing schizophrenia like they do now having an ulcer or having tuberculosis, which is to say, it's not their fault. You don't say someone has a schizophrenic personality anymore. In the same way that we don't say people have an ulceric personality or tuberculin personality. That once you give a causal force to something, you remove the stigma from it. You remove this kind of like weak thing that people do, which is blame the person for their disease.
I hear you loud and clear, and this is it's exceedingly reasonable and rational perspective. On the other hand, to play devil's advocate, it seems to me that a scientific approach and method and worldview that comes to that conclusion that is so flies in the face of what our experience tells us, that we are at bottom responsible agents and that we cannot live otherwise. We cannot live. We could obviously change laws and punishment and stuff like that, but deep down it's impossible to accept, really, I think, the idea that I and any other human that I recognize as having a subjective experience, right? That the moment I accept that you're not just an automaton and that you're not just a robot and that you're having this inner experience and that you, like me, are having this very, very fundamental and strong feeling of choice and of responsibility, I think it can be argued, and it needs to be taken seriously, the argument, that shows the limit of the scientific method, that it's not accounting for the subjective, responsible self, right? And insofar as it explains everything away, it's leaving out something fundamental to being human. And so, without getting mystical or religious or anything, I understand, I sympathize with the philosophical view that everything you've just said could also be used as an argument to show the limitations of the very scientific method that scientists take so, as you admitted earlier, unquestioningly. Right? And maybe it's going to take a new type of science where there is a great philosopher of science that I wrote a book called The Physics of Free Will or something. I've forgotten the name of it, but she makes this argument that there are these pockets of agency, not just human beings, but like corporations and, anthills and, there's all sorts of like, the universe, what has emerged from these fundamental laws somehow, which we have some inkling of, but not obviously a complete understanding of, are these agents.
Yeah.
And that we need to kind of have a philosophy of science and eventually an actual scientific approach that recognizes that. And insofar as you try and sweep it under the rug, it's like the consciousness issue. Like for years they said, oh, it's not something that anything meaningful can be even said about, but eventually reality comes striking back. And I think that the reality of our sense of agency has to be explained in some way. I don't think this third person causistic explanation is going to be seen in 200 years as being definitive or complete.
Yeah. So I'm very much a compatibilist. I very much think we obviously have free will. So I don't ascribe to I have broken from my mentor's tradition.
Oh, good. And did philosophy help you do that, you think?
I don't know. What did it help me do?
No, not what did it help you do.
Yeah,
What helped you do it? If it wasn't philosophy, what helped you? Is it just your own
sense.
personal experience? Yeah, right.
Yeah, well, I do think there is some scientific backing, which is, all right. So if you take, these are somewhat morbid experiments if you're hearing about them for the first time, but if you take a monkey and put them in a chair just like the one I'm in, and you kind of you do this thing, you have to, because you're recording using these like glass electrodes that are sticking into their brain and into like literally recording from individual neurons all around the brain. So their head is fixed, they call it. It's kind of like has a bar that holds it still. And sometimes they can move their arms and sometimes they can't. And there's just a really, really fascinating thing, which is you can take an object like a cup and start it on the other side of the room. And like it's a cup, if you did this to my brain right now and took a mug I'm familiar with and put it over there, my brain would represent it in some capacity. And that representation would be my plan to grab it or my plan to interact with it. It would afford itself if you need that word. I hate that word, but if you need it, sure. And as the cup got closer and closer, it would like reveal more options. And if you imagined more objects kind of like populating the room and kind of coming towards me, my brain would be planning. I don't actually have to make the movements, but my brain would be planning to make the movements that it considers to be of possible likelihood. And so there's a physiological thing that's happening when I say planning, which is the thresholds for those neurons firing are being made like looser. So the neurons to engage in that action, grab a baseball out of the air, grab the mug if it falls, that kind of thing, will happen a couple milliseconds quicker because you've planned them. You don't even have to do them. You just pre-plan a lot of things. It's like preheating the oven for thousands of different possible options that you might do. 99.9999999% of which you never do. And to me, just there's a very commonsensical way of understanding free will, which is if you buy that all systems care about the preservation of energy and try not to waste energy, either thermodynamic or evolutionary, it doesn't really matter what your framework is, where you're coming from. There's generally conservation of energy. Things try to be more efficient over time. There's no way in hell, if we were in a deterministic universe with no free will, that our brains would spend double-digit percentages of their metabolism planning things that we don't end up doing.
Right.
To me, that's just
considering options.
Yeah. To me, that's just like QED. Obviously, we're choosing amongst options, therefore things aren't determined. I don't really care about the mechanism by which one of those is selected. The fact that there are preheated ovens that go to waste is not something evolution would keep around if it wasn't necessary, if our behavior was determined. So to me, that's just enough, and that
I like it.
that matches common
buy it.
sense. It matches subjectivity, and it matches also like the moral responsibility we have to own our own actions.
Dali said, "I believe in evolution for everyone else. You may have descended from monkeys. I descended from angels." So maybe I don't. Maybe the perspective, an evolved perspective actually could be that I never blame anybody. I try and see the most expansive view of why they behave a certain way, and I don't. Our criminal justice system shouldn't be retributive. It should be restorative, but yet we should assume responsibility ourselves.
Yeah.
That seems to be a kind of balanced view. But and then I do think there's something to recognizing the agency of another human that is what connects us. Like if I didn't think you had agency, I take it back, because if I didn't think you had agency, I would see no purpose to our relationship, right? So I think that there's this fundamental building block of human rapport is responsibility and agency.
Right. And you wouldn't be mad at me when I was late for podcasting.
I could never be mad about anything.
I know that's the trouble.
Well, so that was one of like Sam Harris's views once about. Oh no, it wasn't him. It was like someone on a philosophy podcast that I was listening to, and they said, "Oh yeah, it's actually a good view to not believe in free will, because you can't hate somebody or something that doesn't have free will." And to which the other philosopher responded, "What do you mean? I don't think my Roomba has free will, and I fucking hate it." So it's not a prerequisite for hatred to think that free will has to not exist.
Well, but people get angry at literal dice,
right?
When they don't roll the roll that they want. So that has nothing to do with the logic of whether. I mean, it's literally the thing that is random.
Right.
You still get mad at. So when we say we get mad at a Roomba, that's not because of what we think of the Roomba, or because it's just a feature of the human soul to believe that like things that interact with us, we have our emotions are relevant to. I don't know.
Yeah. And so you wouldn't get into debates about this stuff with Sapolsky?
No,
too much nuts and bolts going on.
Well, yeah, too many. I mean, like the degree to which I was free to show up to lab or not, I suppose, or like one can. I mean, it's kind of funny. Like, if he was truly a hardcore incompatibilist, like why would he care about whether or not what I did or did not become, or who
right.
What my.
That's the sense in which it's incoherent.
Worked.
The deterministic view is incoherent because you just simply cannot act as if. As if we don't have choice, right? It's impossible.
What I believe he's trying to do is to make a sweeping moral argument about what we can and cannot hold people responsible for.
Right.
Because there are cases of people that went up to the top of a tower in Texas and shot some people who had a brain tumor, right in the spot that controls kind of like impulse control. Mm-hmm. We know people that have head injuries have impulse control problems. Who are they now? Are they them plus their head injury? Do we find fault in them? Do we give them kind of more room to breathe and more room to operate, given that we know that they recently had a head injury and that they're missing part of their prefrontal cortex?
The interesting and endearing contradiction is that obviously it presupposes that the culture itself has a choice about this,
right?
And that we have a choice to not be so, vindictive in our punishment. Right? Like that very approach, and if you say it sounds right, and I agree with that politically. That's what's interesting, is I do think that it's actually more politically expedient to not believe in free will. It's more compatible with a progressive point of view, especially when it comes to criminal justice, right?
I had a friend, let's see, I have a couple friend, a man and a woman, and they rock climb a lot. And at the time, I was dating someone who had on and off troubles with depression. And the woman, I think there was a climbing injury. They were bouldering. The woman of the other couple, they fell and kind of broke her ankle. And they had a whole summer planned of they were going to climb, they were going to get in their car and they had the route planned and they had all the mountains and all the places they were going to stay. She broke her ankle at the beginning of summer. And I talked to my friend about it and he was so sad. He's like, damn it. Like, it really sucks. We can't go on our climbing trip. We can't have our summer that we wanted to have because she has a broken foot. And what struck me was how, like, okay, he was frustrated, but he was frustrated at the universe, not at her. And how okay he was, and they were together collectively, changing their plans for the entire summer based on this injury. And so depression is episodic, and people can get into very dark states. Depression, like schizophrenia and a lot of mental illnesses, are episodic. And so when someone gets depressed at the beginning of summer, let's imagine that same couple, and she doesn't fall off and break her ankle, but she just says, I'm really not feeling good. And she has a depressive bout at the beginning of summer. And then does he say, oh, well, we have to cancel all our plans for the summer and be okay with it and not blame her, but blame the universe? No, he kind of holds a small grudge against her. That, this illness is what he has to live with. And what's this? There is a difference between how we treat mental illnesses and physical injuries, even though it's quite possible that what happened on a molecular level in the person who had a depressive bout's brain was it broke, and it's going to heal. In a couple months, it will heal. Good sleep and water and vitamins and rest and no stress. It will heal just like the ankle will. But we as a society don't give the same room to breathe, and we don't allow the same explanations. And I think that what that fundamentally has to do with is how we see and view these diseases. And we don't view depression as a break in the way that, because we can see a bone and we can look at the x-ray and we can see the damage. We just can't simply see the damage during depression. But I think Sapolsky, and what I also believe, is that one day we will be able to see that. And that when that happens, you might get a brain x-ray equivalent back, just be like, sorry, she depressed. You probably shouldn't go on your trip this summer for the same reasons, because it's going to be miserable and painful.
But so do you think this is going to make it so that there's less and less room for any sort of agency? Or do you think, is there always fundamentally a pocket of it? Or what's going to be the difference between the person who can pick themselves up by the bootstraps? Where is there room for that in this future view of this more mechanistic view of the brain? Well,
let's take the broken ankle and apply what we do in like our criminal justice system to that kind of thing. It's like it just might shift more towards rehabilitation than blame, right, punishment. I don't know. What if you punished someone for falling and breaking their ankle?
Yeah, I remember when in Italy there was this point of view, and in a little village where I grew up,
for 3 months.
We'd get like a friend would fall off his bicycle when we were like 10 years old, and then start crying like crazy, and I'd be like, does it hurt? And he goes, no, my mom's just gonna be so mad that I fell off my bicycle. And they were
you mean out of shame because he's
no because they get in trouble for getting hurt, and get punished.
It's funny. I fell off your unicycle and you weren't mad at me.
Right. Oh yeah, we've been learning to ride these electric unicycles. They're super fun. Anyway, obviously this is an ongoing discussion. We should probably start to wrap it up. I wanted to talk briefly about what's his name? You listened to it more briefly now. Episode 132 of Sean Carroll's podcast.
Yeah, we should talk about it another time.
Okay,
that's a whole thing.
That's a whole
beautiful, beautiful thing.
Yeah.
That guy.
Listen to 132. What's his name?
I want to say Michael Levin.
Yeah.
Levin. I might get the first name wrong. He gave a talk that I don't know what this is like in the filmmaker world. Imagine, I don't know how many movies get like, isn't there a thing like an 8-minute standing ovation at Cannes or something?
Yeah.
This guy gave a talk a couple years ago that across the scientific community got the equivalent of that. Like it blew people's minds. People that study this stuff, people that, care about, if you care about the brains, if you care about genes, if you care about biology, if you care about AI, even if you care about anything, this talk, standing ovation.
And the nature of explanation he's very interested in too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I've never heard, it's so refreshing and rare to hear a scientist where every single word, and then as it combines into a sentence, and then as that sentence combines with other sentences into an argument, is true. like like he's
That's a
not
bold claim.
well, no, it because if you listen, he's not overselling, he's not underselling. He's saying what happened. And I mean, I just find it so refreshing. I could listen to that guy forever.
Awesome. Yeah, I
It's
had a
great.
similar experience and begged Patrick to listen to this podcast, hoping that he would love it as much as I was loving it. So go find it and listen to it, and then that way we will talk about it on the next podcast and be able to have an
Yeah,
informed
the short
audience as
answer is
well.
he can like turn I think both frog and worm embryos into other species of worm or frog by controlling the electrical activity during development.
Mm-hmm.
It's nuts. It flies in the face of every, like, it's consistent with some kinds of beliefs about things, but it's so beautiful and so cool and so weird. And it fundamentally gets to this. I think there's an interesting thought experiment I can propose that would, if any of our listeners do go listen to that, would help them listen to it, which is, and I've wondered this, and I don't know the answer to this, which is, if we knew humanity was going to die out, we just knew something was happening, like Children of Men style, no more humans, but we wanted to leave like the ability to create a human, instructions, the IKEA instruction manual for how to create a human. If some alien civilization comes at any point in the future and they come across us, we want to give them the blueprint.
Mm-hmm.
How would you do it? Could we do it? And the answer, I think, is no.
Oh,
There's,
really?
there's no way to do it. The reason is you need a human womb. You would have, the only way to do it is to keep a living human, because there are patterns contained within the living organism that get passed down that cannot be recreated. And that's fundamentally what his talk and his science and his research is about. It's about, the genome tells you nothing. If you just left a list of the genome, what the hell would you do with it? Even like an egg or a sperm, nothing. You need something to grow in it. Like, and it can't be an artificial thing. You cannot make a human. This is the exact reason we cannot actually truly clone a thing anymore. You cannot bring back a woolly mammoth. You can bring back a woolly mammoth that you found in Siberia and inject little like bits of its DNA into a living elephant egg,
Mm-hmm.
and then grow that in an elephant, which is a close approximation of a mammoth. And then the thing you get out might look vaguely like our cartoon depictions of woolly mammoths, but it will never be a woolly mammoth because it was not grown in a woolly mammoth womb, which we can never create. And so it's that same thing. And it's just this completely new way of thinking about how creatures grow that is probably like, I